As we continue the poetry unit in W203, I wanted to say a few things about the use of myth in poetry, particularly as it's developed by work from William Butler Yeats and Gary Snyder. We've talked a little bit about the mythopoeic dimensions of a poem, but just to kind of go back and think through this a little more carefully, perhaps, think about the kinds of myths that you can engage within a poem. You can also expand this to a sense of the kinds of mythic understandings that are invoked within fiction writing and nonfiction as well. And writers take an older myth and try to retell it in contemporary terms, or how a writer rethinks his or her identity through mythic aspects of the world. Think about the kinds of myths that are out there, though, that you might engage here. Basic ancient mythic stories that are there. You think about like the Greco-Roman world and its myths, but also open that up to other kinds of myths as well. Your own culture might pose other kinds of myths. Charles Olson always, as a poet, pointed to Mesoamerican mythologies and why American writers don't more directly engage the myths that were first kind of conceived in their own land. So you can go to other mythologies as well. Things like the Mesoamerican myth of the Popol Vuh, the beginnings of the world, as they're understood in Mesoamerican mythology. Other sacred stories, biblical stories, those are also very fruitful to think about. Mythic meanings, what kinds of ultimate meanings are present within and underneath those stories as well. You can think about stories of national or geographical identity. In American terms, is there a difference between saying you're from the Rust Belt, or you're from the South, or you're from the West? Think about all the kinds of mythic dimensions are present within an identity that is crafted as I'm a Southerner and I'm from Indiana. How do those pose mythic dimensions to one's character and self? And you can also think about personal and familial myths here as well. Does your family have kind of mythic stories that are always told, around family events that call people back to what it is to be part of the family? Myths also, kind of develop into or engage a sense of theme here, right? Those underlying meanings that are present within a story, those larger meanings that the writer is working with as he or she unfolds a story or develops a poem. The kinds of things that are present here are questions of order, whether it's the order of the cosmos or the universe, a sense of national order or meaning, a sense of cultural order, or a sense of a household's order. All these things have been mythically expressed in various kinds of tales and stories. As well here, these are mythic aspects to identity, whether you think about identity in terms of one's ethnicity or sexuality and gender or race. Various kinds of myths tell those stories as well. A couple things to think about here as well in terms of myth. First, a place offers a sense of myth. Like I said, where you're from offers a sense of who you are in some ways, maybe less so in the age of globalization, but there's always a tension in where you're from as defining who you are. And also, I think work also sets up some kind of mythic aspects of oneself, that how does what you do define who you are, or how does who you are define what you do? The relationship there might be engaged to kind of think about what does it mean to work and to do, and how does that impact your sense of identity? Myths there are worth exploring. To look at a couple of examples here in terms of how writers use myth, we can look at William Butler Yeats' poem Crazy Jane on the Day of Judgment. Yeats here is taking is kind of rethinking a basic kind of religious mythology, the Judgment Day, and is dropping a character called Crazy Jane, who appears in various of his poems. So you have this kind of like very kind of earthy, plain spoken character, Crazy Jane, who is dropped into the middle of this kind of mythic world of divine and ultimate judgment, and how she explains herself to the judge. So this is the first two stanzas of Crazy Jane on the Day of Judgment. Love is all unsatisfied that cannot take the whole body and soul, and that is what Jane said. Take the sour, if you take me, I can scoff and lour and scold for an hour. That's certainly the case, said he. So note the play here in the characters, kind of a sense of a high topic, right? That, we people write love poems all the time. People discuss love mythically and what it means and how it works, and yet Jane's kind of insight into what love is and how love can't be defined in some ways, how love becomes unsatisfying as well as satisfying in some ways. That the play here that Yeats makes on mythic understandings is really interesting here, particularly when love is being discussed in this ultimate context of the Day of Judgment. And Jane has this like deep insight into how love has worked within her life, and how it hasn't worked. It kind of forces or pushes the reader to rethink what exactly we can know about love, and what we can understand about it as a basic human experience. How the larger mythologies might fail on this, but if we bring it down to the boundaries of the particular human experience of it, it may force us to kind of rethink what we pretend to understand about love and its ultimate purpose within human experience. In terms of Gary Snyder's poem, you can think about the interesting work dimensions here. In Snyder's poem, he builds a comparison between a search for religious meaning and an experience of daily work that kind of mythically plays itself out in this poem, which is why log truck drivers rise earlier than students of Zen. A long title, which is playful in its own way. In the high seat before dawn dark, polished hubs gleam and the shiny diesel stack worms and flutters up the Tyler Road grade to the logging on Poorman Creek, 30 miles of dust. There is no other life. Note the kind of play in the poem between the more religious, higher sense of the world and its meanings that a student of Zen might try to take, versus the kind of basic experience of the world that a trucker has on a daily experience, and how both of these things work together to offer a sense of how we move through the world in work. Note the in the poem, Snyder builds on specifics of the trucker's world, the trucker's task. You don't necessarily know where Tyler Road is, but its specificity offers a sense of place and purpose. The 30 miles of dust, that the trucker experiences on a daily drive. How does that compare to the sense of the preacher standing at the graveside at a funeral? Dust to dust and ashes to ashes. And then that final sentence, right? There is no other life. It sounds religious, but it also could be the thing that the trucker says within the cab, drinking the coffee as the trip is commenced in the before dawn dark. So notice how Snyder here takes some kind of like religious sounding stuff and works it with some basic stuff of the world of work to build a sense of mythic meaning in this poem.